from the year, say, if we take the year of the invasion of the Sokoto Caliphate, 1903, if we take that year, 54 years later, colonialism was thrown out of Africa. Brothers and sisters, the Africans eventually overcame colonialism. And Africa is not colonized today because of it. It is really the story of our victory over incredible odds and incredible wars. So in the second part, we'd like to do that. And I would like to thank you for the opportunity to share part one of this presentation today. And thank you all. Okay, you have to put that on fan. Are there any questions? No? Okay. Miss, sister?
I want to understand. You say that there are no areas colonized today. What do you call what's going on?
Okay, I heard myself say that. When I said, okay, remember we also talked about, we weren't talking about South Africa in this presentation. We weren't talking about South Africa. We weren't talking about, Tunisia and some other places. Settler colonies are a different story. But even the settler colonies that existed, the Rhodesia that existed is no longer a settler colony. Angola, Mozambique, you know, most of those have fallen. Those colonial regimes have fallen. And South Africa will fall too. But I don't think that's your question.
I think you need to explain the difference between settler colonies, what's going on now. Just like you had governors established, like Stanley became a governor. The difference between...
No legislative
right,
and all of that.
Okay, and the difference, there were a couple of types of colonial invasion. One of them led to large numbers of Europeans coming in and settling the land. That type of colonial invasion created a country we call America, like this country. Large numbers of whites came from different parts of the world and settled. That happened in Africa as well. And some of the colonies that they established through settlement were Algeria, South Africa. Mozambique is a different story because the Portuguese usually kind of intermixed with the people, but it still was a settler colony. Rhodesia, as it was called, was a white settler colony. Namibia, Angola, all were white settler colonies, where large numbers of whites came in to settle them. And they had a somewhat different historical quality because of that. South Africa is a completely different story. South Africa is like America. The same time that European, they wanted to go someplace to make their future, make their fortune, they could go to America, South Africa, or Australia. They were all like the same place. They had a gold rush in America in 1849, a diamond rush and a gold rush in South Africa around the same time. And the Europeans would go there and try to settle, but they weren't able to destroy the Africans and wipe out all the Africans like they did so many of the Native Americans in this country. So it made a difference so that even though they set up, just like they set up the American government, you know, the U.S. legislature, the various states and stuff, and they disenfranchised Africans and they disenfranchised Native Americans, when they set these up, they tried to do the same in South Africa, but the majority of people remained the same. So that particular pattern of settler colonization is somewhat different than what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is what happened in the majority of African countries, in that you had large numbers of troops come in, and then when they did, not a lot of settlers did. They tried a large number of settlement in Kenya, and they tried seizing all the land from the people, and the Kenyans erupted in the Mau Mau rebellions in the 50s, and millions of people were killed. Millions of people were killed. And that showed the Europeans how futile that was to do in other parts of Africa. See, and South Africa is a story that deserves its own treatment. It really is a special treatment. Today is not the beginning of our grasping of modern African history. It's not the end of it, it's the beginning. See what I'm saying? And every time that we study, we continue from this point. It's like there comes a time where we see modern Africa for itself, where we see modern Africa is not simply the lack of progression and the lack of ancient African glory. That modern Africa is not the example, the result of the destruction of African civilization. It's the result of the emergence of African civilization. African civilization migrated to different parts of Africa and began building them up. When you look at South Africa, even the Zulu, the Bantu migration, which populated Southern Africa with Bantu-speaking peoples, is only 500 years old. It wasn't there thousands. There were no Zulu in South Africa 500 years ago. So African migration came, and European migration came, and they sort of met and fought head to head. And it's a different story in terms of colonization than the story of most of the other parts of Africa. I hope that begins to answer your question. Any more? Bill Keys. I don't like Bill Keys' questions. She's been studying, this is my daughter, she's been studying African history for a long time, and she asked me hard questions. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, she was making a point in reference to colonialization, and you said South Africa is a different story, and then you refuted it with saying Kenya. And I would say that even Kenya and my own personal studies, what they have, instead of having colonization and people labeling Kenya as one of the successful places as not having colonization, we still have a colonization, which is the colonization of the mind, like the author and Dawud Watts. I'm just making a statement. Like the author in Dawud Watts says, colonization of the mind. Just make a comment. Just a comment.
Would you like me to comment, or would you like your comment just to be heard? When we talk about neocolonialism, when we talk about colonization of the mind, we need to be careful. I think that what happens is that, I'm going to have to be a little brutal right here, I hope you don't mind. I think we're arrogant. I think that we assume because we study Nile Valley civilizations and we, read a little bit about contemporary events that we understand what's going on in Africa. And instead of going into it in detail, instead of dealing with a lot of people and treating it as sincerely and as giving it the weight that it really has, we become short, we become polemic. We say, well, yeah, we know that guys in Africa, it's more colonized now with neocolonialists. Hey, look, until you slept in the bed, don't complain about the accommodations. I would think that one of the things that I would want us to all to do is to study and to work with Africans more and more and more. And as we do that, then we'll realize that the complexity of their situation is something that we can't make snap decisions about. I've heard people come up and tell me stuff about, neocolonialism that, and military states that, and it's worse now than it's ever been. I really don't think it is. I really think that these people fought, our cousins fought. I wish we would have overthrown the forces that oppressed us. Once! We'd have a whole different feeling about who we are. We really haven't gotten that yet. In some places they have in the Western Hemisphere. But we're still struggling to overthrow it. Once we came close in the 60s. Sure enough, we came close. We didn't quite succeed. So it's true that a lot of the leadership, a lot of the current political events in Africa hinge on rather obtuse and frustrating relationships with the West and sources of production and the rest of that, and the bigger markets and the IMF and all the rest of those things. That what we have to really do is to take our study to a different point, and then from then we start espousing opinions and things. So I understand about colonization of the mind, and I agree that a lot of people in Africa are not, fully focused on their own independence You know, we're not fully focused on our own independence, but those of us who will try, those of us who will make the effort to be focused and to fight for African consciousness, for African independence, need to take that on a higher level in terms of our own consciousness of modern African history, so that that consciousness empowers us, and it empowers our young people, and that our young people, you know, need to hear the whole story. They don't just need to hear, well, you know, it didn't quite go all the way, you know, because there are places that it did go all the way. And we need to know all of those stories. We need to know the story of Modibo Keita and Mali. We need to know many of them. I didn't say Sundiata, I said Modibo. You know, that's in the 60s, 1960s. You know, we need to know the story of Kwame Nkrumah. Most of our young people don't even know the story of Ghana. You know, we need to know the story of that Bill Keys has just done some research on, of the Mau Mau and the Kikuyu rebellion in Kenya. We need to know the story of, I was going to say Mirambo, and how the leaders of the colonial, you know, the resistance to colonialism became the heroes and the guides. We need to know the story of Baibure in Sierra Leone, and the story of Na Asantewa in Ghana. You know, we need to know all of these things before we start making judgments about what is and what is not accomplished, you know, in terms of independence and freeing oneself on the African landmass. And so, to answer your opinion with an opinion, I'm not suggesting that there is not colonization of the mind. There certainly is. But I think from this point of view, from our point of view, we need to step into a new arena of information. And we need to take modern African history, raise it, use it to raise the consciousness of our own people, and then move forward from there. We have the intellect to do that. Yes, Obadeli.
First, I'd just like to say that your presentation was a good crystallization of what Dr. Clark talks about a lot, about how African people fought and resisted, and also the preconditions to that, the military might of African people, and dispelling those myths. One thing I wanted to ask you is, in retrieving all of this primary data, the images, the maps, and so forth, are there any areas that you're presently looking at researching or presently researching that you need help in, particular maps, images, projects that you're trying to retrieve information on, so that people here in Atlanta could plug into that to try to help out in some of that research, or key critical areas dealing with this topic on African military history?
That's a great question. I thank you for that question. I had never been asked that question before, so I have to think about it for a second, but immediately some things did come to mind. First of all, there's a language barrier. What happens is that many of the sources here in the colonization of Africa, some of the primary sources that need to be brought back into consciousness are in different languages. I think that if there could be a French translation effort for about maybe 7 or 8 important books.
Could you give them to his name?
Sure. One of them would be Deux Campagnes au Soudan Français by Gallieni. Bange's work, Au Niger, au Golfe de Guinée. There are some histories of the Tirailleurs Sénégalais in French that I haven't had a chance to struggle through, because I struggle in French. I mean, I can get through it, but it takes a long time. There are some German works. Nachigo, for example, hasn't been effectively translated. There are really a lot of period works. Diop, for example, uses Monet and some other sources which really haven't been fully translated yet. You know, I think that translation as a general area is one area that's in dire need of work. There need to be databases, visual databases. We're trying to work on those now. I mean, it's really quite a capital-intensive kind of movement to get these kind of images, because we have thousands. You saw 80. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you only saw 80 images today. That's all you saw was 80 images. You know, but there are literally thousands of these images. I think that just a source, an organized effort to create a primary source library that is not under the government ambit and that focuses on these would be quite an important activity that needs to be done. And finally, the whole issue of modern African history has got to be brought up into black public consciousness. What happens is we really have gotten almost overly focused on the ancient records. And I think the ancient records are great. I write materials on that myself, and I learn a lot from it. But in reality, if we think the ancient records, you know, were great and it was just destroyed, then we haven't crossed the threshold that will empower us and our children to move forward into African political activity and consciousness. And I think to create more activities in which modern African history is brought into consciousness is perhaps one of the greatest efforts, because that will not only bring us into modern Africa, to bring us into our own selves. Because we are modern African history as we speak. We live. We are Africans. We are making history. Therefore, we are making African history. Okay, and I'd like to see more modern African history be on the agenda of some of these activities and events. Yes, that's an excellent question. It's going to have me thinking for a long time.
For the future of Africa, I'm wondering about your ideas in reference to Kwame Nkrumah and his dream of the United States of Africa. For normal African Americans who are knowledgeable, I think it would be wise if we looked into some political and economic activities with them, as we already do. But politically, I think would be a strength, trying to organize the various countries, Nigeria, Niger, the various countries, to come back together to make themselves a strong market and a viability up against this world, this European and American efforts to
There are efforts.
consume.
Pan-Africanism was a guiding ideology in the independence movements in Africa. Very much a guiding ideology, and so therefore, it's deeply planted. The Pan-African idea is deeply planted in the African consciousness, especially the political consciousness of people who are, in Africa and in America. I saw this wonderful photograph of Malcolm, and he was with Nkrumah and Chuck Stone, and it was really, really nice. Yeah, it was up at Harvard.
Where's Chuck Stone at today? I don't know very much about Chuck.
Chuck Stone's from D.C., where he is now. He used to live around the corner from me. But to get to your question, I agree. I think Pan-Africanism has to be resuscitated as an active intellectual vehicle to unite peoples of color all over the world and Africa. There are activities within Africa going on now. West Africa. When I was a reporter on the Hill, we covered President Diop of Senegal a couple of times. I had a chance to talk to him. And one of the things that he was promoting was the Federation of West Africa. And we need to promote those kinds of events as well, those kinds of organizations as well, and put them in the consciousness. African Americans have a great deal more access to international media than we think. And we need to focus on that. But what you're asking is a very big question. And I think it's something that we're going to all lead toward. But first things first, you crawl before you walk. We got so many problems out here that we know that one of the solutions is certainly consciousness development. Raising consciousness, period, helps. Or I should say helps, period. I'm a little dyslexic. Raising consciousness helps. It helps. That's one of the reasons we do what we do. Because we know that if somebody out there, you never know who your words are going to affect, or your information. But as long as you raise consciousness, then you're not hurting the progress. Because the idea that kills us is lowering consciousness. Here we are. What they tried to do with us is to destroy our consciousness. We spoke our languages. They, would kill people, cut off tongues and legs and feet, all kinds of brutal and violent things, just because they knew that our consciousness is what makes us strong. See, our consciousness is what gives us power. Their consciousness is what gives them power. We buy into their consciousness, what do? We give them power. You see, and it is the consciousness that Pan-Africanism represents is a very, very powerful force, if we could really harness it again. And it is linked to the historical consciousness of modern African history. It is linked. So that, you know, it's a big question, and we work on it continuously. I don't think that we can be so bold as to think we're going to lead, you know, events that we don't really know about, but there are, you know, leadership opportunities, there are forward mobility activities, there are cadres of people that need to go and travel and learn and get very grounded in what they're doing.
Yeah, like our African-American so-called leaders, the people who can make a difference politically in helping the countries get along with each other, even the African countries, to get along with each other for your better good of your region. You know?
Well, I can't really
on that level,
comment on that. I don't know if that's workable in that sense. I mean, with Brother Sullivan and other people with their organizations are going in, and it's big stuff. I mean, to me, Jeffrey, it's like, you know, there are simple ideas that make a lot of sense. But the reality is that our history and our people are quite complex. And I think personally that we have to embrace the complexity of our situation first. Then we can move towards simplicity. I think that we have been duped into believing that stuff in our history is simple. And therefore we can move, you know, and assume that we can simply redress situations. And I just don't think it's that simple. I think it's going to call for a greater commitment to study more, a greater commitment to be more involved with Africa, the African community, the African peoples, the African educational system, African economic and political development. You know, all of that's going to, a greater commitment to all of that's going to be required for us to move forward. But again, the first step is consciousness. And I hope and I pray that the presentation today has made some small contribution, some ammunition, if you will, to that consciousness. The brother back here.
Wondering, do we really have time for this hope that African people will all come together somehow in unity? I mean, you know, with the New World Order coming on and the retaking of Africa with, you know, this, what they're doing in Somalia right now, I think that's just the start of what they're planning for Africa. Do we really have the time to hope that somehow, I mean, after all this time, with all the effort, that we hadn't come together yet? I'm just wondering how is that?
How realistic is that?
Yes.
I think it's very realistic. I mean, Tyler, what is time?
It's very real, you see, because if you don't have, that's what you call hope. You know, who can say how much time we got? You know, and that's what you call hope. And that's what commitment is based on, hope. If you don't have that hope and you become hopeless, then it wipes your commitment away. And that's where you get the phrase, what's the use?
But one of the key things that I think that was coming out with Dawud's presentation is the whole thing of image and perception. The perception that Europeans have gotten African people to buy into is the fact that they are all powerful, they are totally united, there are no frictions or divisions among them. If you examine the history of peoples in the world, no people totally united as one conglomerate of people totally unified. That's the problem we run into as a people when we look at history. If you talk about the New World Order, African people are talking about moving together in the Caribbean and on the African continent. You got 7-pack coming. The question is as Brother Otem mentioned, if you lose hope, And if you look at what Dawud did, should be an inspiration that we are fighting people. The thing is we lose the opportunity to get the information that shows us that we fought and that we were successful. That's the problem. And what happens is Europeans take this information, put it in think tanks like the Brookings Institute and the Hoover Institute,
Right.
and they use that as war game strategies to fight against us. So that's where the study and the research, the primary research that Dawud talks about, comes into play. We have to do that so that we don't lose hope.
Take an example. Okay, now imagine this. Do we have hope? Look at South America and look at North America as histories of settler colonies. Europeans coming over, and over the course of time, especially when the new weapons came out in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, and really seizing large amounts of land. They wanted to do that in Africa, but the Africans prevented them. So it's not just about hope. Do we have the history, the record, that shows us that we can in fact defend the land from it and work toward unification? Certainly. Certainly. But it ain't easy. It's not easy, and it's going to take brothers like you and me, you know, and as well as like brothers like Obadele and Otim. It's going to take sisters like Imma to like rededicate themselves. Now these brothers and sisters, look, 23 years I've been in this field, and I'm just getting started. That's what it takes. That's what it takes. It takes real dedication. And there are people in Africa right now just as dedicated as we've ever been. They're there. They really are.
I wasn't saying that we don't have any hope. I was just wondering if that was the hope, you know, that somehow that we're gonna all come together, or really is it in the spirituality? I mean, that's my hope.
I mean, you can't really separate the people and their spirituality. You know, the African people, the struggle for independence and the nature to be free and to fight for freedom and to gain freedom at any cost is part of our spirit, as well as part of our history, as well as part of our hope. You know, I mean, I understand that the answer is, you know, when you look at Somalia, again, the American media really runs it on us. We only see what's wrong. I mean, you know, if you had a son, okay, and this son, you know, every time you walked in the door, you said, "Doggone you, son, you are lazy, you are worthless, you are shiftless," and you said it, your son would grow up with a horrible inferiority complex. That's what they do with us. They say, "Doggone it, Africa." Every time, you know, here's Liberia blowing up, here's Somalia, here's a Sudan, and, you know, famine in Sudan, famine in Ethiopia and Eritrea. Do you see the steel development in Nigeria? Do you see the growth of and the success of Zimbabwe? See what I'm saying? It's there, but we have to continually study. We have to look at where there are problems, solve problems, and work towards solve, and look to where there's successes. Incorporate both of those into our perspective, into our ideology, into our awareness that we project.